Hello, everybody, and welcome to This.Javascript State of Browsers. Welcome. Thank you so much for attending. I'm going to move on over to my slides really quickly and tell you about some exciting things. All right, there we go. Press play. Can everyone see my screen, hopefully? All right, so State of Browsers. Today we have a very special invited guest web expert and co-moderator Amal Hussein, who is going to be leading a lot of the discussion afterwards. So thank you, Amal, for joining. We also have Brendan Eich, who is the creator of JavaScript, also co-founder, CEO of Brave Software. Matt Claypotch, also known as Potch, a developer advocate at Mozilla. Patrick Kettner, representing Edge at Microsoft. Paul Frazee, representing Beaker browser. Myself, I'm a Google developer expert and on the RxJs core team. And Paul Kinlan, who is senior developer advocate at Google. So very excited to have everybody. And I realized actually that my slides were out of order. So This.Javascript. So we do these on a quarterly basis. We'll do frameworks and browsers. And it's really a way to just get a quick 5 to 10 minute update from each prominent framework library. And again, this time around, it's browsers. So very, very excited to have this. Also, wouldn't be able to do this without the time borrowed from my very generous co-founders who let me do things for the community. And we love doing stuff for the community. So This.Labs, we do JavaScript consulting. So ping us if you need. A few announcements for things related to This.Javascript. We have 2 events coming up. The first one is This.Javascript State of Mobile, which is our first State of Mobile happening August 21st. So definitely sign up for that if you care about things related to mobile stuff. And then we have a very special Browser Contributor Days, which is another event we do through This.Media. August 24th, that's going to be live broadcasted. I'm co-hosting this with Adi Osmani, and we're bringing together a bunch of the different browser vendors to chat in person live about exciting things, and they want to hear from all developers. So excited about that too. So a little bit of an idea of what's going to be happening. So these are our introductions. Then we're going to be doing the updates from everybody, and then we will go into basically discussion and the future of browsers, and then go ahead and end. Oh, another thing is we have a few different podcasts that have just launched on Modern Web. So if you care about testing, Preact, or V8, definitely check out Modern Web and some of the things we have going on there. All right, so now I want to go ahead and stop sharing and give it to. So who wants to go first? We didn't discuss about, order. I'll leave it to everybody. Should I just pick someone? Paul?
I'm happy to dive in.
Patrick? Okay, Patrick, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Hold on, let me get my slides up.
Yep. So Patrick is representing Edge, and you're a project. You're not a project manager. Programmer?
I am a project. I don't remember. I'm a PM, but I forget what that stands for. I have manager in my title. I don't really manage much. I do a lot of outreach stuff. I do a lot of interoperability work at Microsoft. So I get to work with pretty much all the people in this room right now to help make the web better and work together as browser friends. And I get to go around and talk to people about all the cool stuff that we're working on. So can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Big blue E. Fantastic. As Tracy said, my name is Patrick. I work on the Edge team out in Redmond in Microsoft. Here today to talk to you about our most recent update, the April 2018 update. Edge is attached to the operating system, so we update every 6 months. Our major updates are every 6 months or so, and our most recent one just happened in April. And we had a whole bunch of features that I was super stoked about and wanted to tell you guys about today. First of all, one of my favorite things, variable fonts landed. In case y'all are unfamiliar, variable fonts allow you to ship down one individual variable font file and then change the heights and the weights and all kinds of different things, so that rather than shipping down like a header font and a body font that's slightly different weights, you can ship one down, adjust it with CSS. It's super cool. Not only that, but they're basically available everywhere now. They're coming up in version 62 in Firefox, which Potch can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in September, so just a few weeks away from full browser support with variable fonts. If you haven't played with them yet, you should be looking at them now, because I almost guarantee that you can have some website savings if you use them. Check out this awesome site, vfonts.com, if you want to check out some more stuff. Just a side note, also color fonts are great. They're something that a lot of people haven't really used that much, but you can have some really, really beautiful fonts that are designed that almost look like images, but are much more accessible for, keyboard users or people that aren't necessarily like screen readers, rather than having them embedded inside of an image. You can check out colorfonts.wtf to find out more about those. We've supported them for a long time. I just am a big fan. I hope more people start to use them more. Another thing we implemented was the media capture API. Media capture allows you to do screen capture, so that you can have kind of like meetings like this one without having to use plugins, which is super exciting, because we want to try and get rid of extensions if we don't need to use them. We added a whole bunch of other extension stuff, though. Speaking of that, we have our extensions now work in private, so you can have your account login stuff, LastPass or other account management extensions. You can have ad blockers in private sessions now, which is super cool. For developer features, we added the notification API inside of extensions. So if you are a developer for web extensions, there is a rich tapestry of notification APIs that you can integrate with, and we now support all of them. We have full parity with Chrome. If you're a developer for extensions, I really hope that you check them out, because they work great. Not only that, we have a whole bunch of DevTools changes and updates. We've been really beefing up our DevTools team in the past few months, year. And one of the really cool features that they just launched a few weeks ago was the standalone F12 app. F12 is our DevTools, and we actually launched, they'll always be available within the browser, but we also launched a standalone application, so you can both target the local version of Edge or in the browser-based app. So like if you have a web view inside of a native Windows application, you can debug it with that same application that you can download from the Windows Store. Not only that, but you can actually debug remote instances of Edge now. So if you have something that only works on your machine, or a bug that only shows up on somebody else's machine, you can debug it with a remote version of F12 now, which is super handy. It's available on all desktop versions of Windows 10 moving forward. It's coming to Xbox and Raspberry Pi. This is remote debugging. It's fantastic. And that remote debugging is made possible because we allowed for a bunch of new protocols. So we have the Edge debugging protocol. It's based off of the Chrome debugging protocol, and it's the thing that allows you to hook in like VS Code or external tools into Chrome in order to get to be able to set your debugger statements or your edit your code within an actual editor. We have that same functionality inside of Edge now. It's great. VS Code actually was able to add that code to support the Edge debugging protocol, in just a few days, really, because it's really similar to the Chrome debugging protocol. If you do anything with debugging protocols, you should check it out, because it's a really cool change to Edge. It makes it a lot easier to automate stuff. We have the cache API view. So if you go into F12 tools, you can view the individual cache entries for service workers. We have a whole bunch of functionalities for ways. We have a service worker inspector as well, so you can actually dive through adding consoles, debug your service worker issues.
Patrick?
Yeah. Yes.
Ooh, sorry. Your audio was going in and out and crackling.
Can you hear me again? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Maybe no headphones?
Just a second.
Better?
Can you hear me?
No.
I can't hear you.
It's like very...
Sorry, can you hear me okay right now?
No.
It sounds like the start of an amazing dubstep track.
I'm so sorry.
You're fine.
It's a little bit Tron, like 1970s, like 1980s Tron, but it's kind of like it's not not quite intelligible.
I wish I could hear how cool that sounds. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and then I can jump back in a little bit. I don't know what's going on. Sorry.
Do you think it's your headphones? Do you want to just like unplug your headphones, maybe?
No, my headphones actually don't have a microphone.
Oh. Maybe unplug your microphone and your headphones. Okay. Cool. You're muted, which is fine. But oh, nope, we can't hear you. I think you probably have to change the audio. Oh, we have lost a Patrick. That's okay. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, so much better.
Hey. So sorry about that. Sorry, I've wasted so much time.
That's okay, you're fine.
Okay, so I was just getting to the exciting stuff with Edge 17. We have service workers. They landed in stable, which means they're available in all major browsers. It's super exciting. Big shout out to Ali and everybody on my team that made it work, and congratulations to all the people named Paul and Jake at the Chrome team that pushed so hard to get here, because super exciting. It's the future of the web. Like I said, service workers are available in all major browsers now. If you're not using it in your website, you're making a mistake. You should definitely be checking it out today. And no matter what your website is, we also added push notifications, which are great, but a lot of people shouldn't use them because users don't always like it, but sometimes they're wonderful. We have a whole bunch of security updates that were added in Edge 17, same-site cookies, which is great if you want to prevent CSRF tokens. I'm running short on time, so I can't go into it, but I'd love to talk more about it. We have upgrade and secure requests, which is great if you have a whole bunch of content or a blog where you have explicitly links that are like HTTP. You can add this as a header, and it will automatically try to request every HTTP request with HTTPS and upgrade it automatically. It's really great for people with old blogs or newspapers or any content where you want to be able to upgrade all your content without necessarily having the ability to dive in and updating everything by hand. We also added sub-resource integrity, which allows you to add a hash to any individual sub-resource. So stuff like JavaScript, CSS files, anything that's loaded as a resource inside your page, to make sure they're not modified in transit or anything. It's a great way to add a lot of security to your page. A whole bunch of other stuff is coming soon in our upcoming fall release. We have CSS masking, which is great. We were one of the last browsers to not support it, so we finally have it. It allows you to add like a SVG cutout shape on top of an element to get something really neat looking. We have overscroll behavior, so you can control what happens when you scroll to the bottom of if you have a nested scrolling, if you want it to continue to scroll once you reach the bottom of an inner scroll. It's really cool. One of the most exciting things, though, is probably WebP. We announced a few weeks ago that we have been working on implementing WebP, and first versions of it will be available in our next public release in the fall. So that includes WebP and WebM videos, which means you can serve a lot smaller pieces of the web to us. Images and videos can get so much smaller. You can get animated stuff. It's really exciting. Over my time, that was a lot of stuff for Edge. Hopefully some of it was intelligible. Cheers.
Thank you so much. You're so nice to stay on track for time. Again, not like crazy. You guys can go 5 to 10 minutes. So, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to seeing you at Browser Contributor Days as well. I think
can't wait to get there.
Really amazing conversation. Who would like to go next? Okay, Potch. Yeah, Potch with the pink microphone. That could be a wrap.
Hello.
Hi.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. 1 second, and I will change from my calendar view to my slides.
I'm actually impressed you're not in a hotel room.
For once. All right, can you see my slides okay?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Then I will get started. Hi, everyone. I am Potch. I'm a developer advocate at Mozilla. I just want to talk to you about what's been going on in Firefox since we last got together. So a lot's gone on, honestly. I think I spoke in November of 2017, which would be right before our big Firefox Quantum sort of product relaunch. So there's quite a bit to cover, but I'm going to go through it very quickly. That little cyan line at the bottom of my slides will keep me honest. All right. So Firefox Quantum was a huge company-wide initiative to sort of modernize the internals and look and feel and experience of using the Firefox browser. So this ran from everything from rewriting our CSS engine, all the way up to a whole brand new UI and everything in between, really taking a look at all the different parts. Quantum is sort of the moniker we've now given to this year's series of versions. So far, we've shipped. There we go. So far, we've shipped quite a few versions. 57 was our flagship Quantum relaunch, and we are now, we just shipped 61, and as Patrick said, 62 will be shipping in September. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of what we've shipped so far, and then what you can look forward to. So Quantum kind of has these big pieces. Flow was really about just taking the browser to bits and running a profiler on it and finding all the little spots where it was slow and just trying to tighten that stuff up. We had just recently moved to a full multi-process platform. So it was a lot of finding like, multi-process communication that was blocking and things like that. And we just sat there and used real websites as benchmarks and said, is this website fast yet? No? Yes. And then Quantum DOM is all about actually reducing jank within an individual page session, about prioritizing tasks like timeouts and paints and user input, and boosting all the stuff that really matters for user responsiveness to the top, and building a scheduler and prioritizer. And then Quantum CSS was sometimes called Stylo, is actually a project in which we took a huge chunk of our style engine and rewrote it in Rust to gain the power of Rust's fantastic parallelism primitives, and actually do a lot of our styling, parsing, and computing of computed styles in parallel, sort of taking advantage of modern hardware. And then Quantum Render is an ongoing project to completely modernize our paint infrastructure by effectively drawing web pages the same way a high-performance video game draws any frame in its game, by working heavily on the GPU. Like I said, we've shipped Flow, DOM, and CSS. Quantum CSS has actually been shipped like a V2 already. So initially, we only computed styles in parallel, and now we are actually parsing style sheets as well. A couple other things we shipped that I'm really excited about. Web authentication. This is awesome. It is a standards-based way to both sign up for and actually authenticate into websites, either using a second factor token or actually just using a token as your authentication method. So what that means is you can do things like, if you have one of those little UB keys on your keyboard, you can hear mine jangling right here. You can actually use that for authentication in addition to a username and password. Super cool, built into the platform. No sort of hacks around that. It's kind of a nice standard to see. ES module support. Can we get a what for ES modules? This was super exciting. Sort of one of the big tentpole pieces that kind of hails from the ES6 era, but I know genuinely wasn't figured out and standardized until relatively recently, and we have now added support. We're super excited about this because I think it's really going to change the game for how people can build sites, not necessarily requiring a massive bundler infrastructure, because modularization is actually available natively. Next, WebAssembly. This is something we at Mozilla are super sort of passionate about. We're proud of this because it's sort of something that was homegrown here, started as ASM.js. But WebAssembly is the binary format for compiled code that can run on the web. It lets you take existing code bases and compile them to run on the web. You can take, C++ programs or Rust programs and compile them to the web. You can take existing games or tool chains for Unity that actually will let you take a Unity game and completely plug-in free, convert it to run in WebGL in your browser. And we think this is going to unlock the web to a whole new audience of people, both as producers and consumers, because of all this new content that's actually going to run. We're also working really closely, not just to have it be a compile target, but to actually play really nicely, in particular with the Rust programming language. We have a project called RustBindGen, and there's WasmBindGen, that's the project I'm thinking of, that actually will make it easier to talk to JavaScript from within Rust and vice versa, and do all that from within WebAssembly. In addition, we're actually also working on standardizing the importing of WebAssembly modules using ES modules. So you'll be able to mix JavaScript and WebAssembly interchangeably for when you need high-performance components. Other things we've shipped, an accessibility inspector built into the DevTools. You can now view the accessibility tree in addition to the DOM tree in Firefox. This is great to see if you're looking at a button and you're like, this button doesn't have, you can actually see whether it has any computed label via ARIA attributes or implied properties or anything like that. Super great for digging in and making sure that your site is accessible and available to everyone. and there's lots more to come with accessibility in our DevTools. And then a thing that we're getting excited about that's coming is what we call time travel debugging or web replay. It's the ability to capture a profile of the browser running and then rewind it, and it will actually rewind the visual state of the browser, user interactions. You can truly just go back in time and rewind the state of the JS engine and everything to a particular moment in time and figure out what was going on that caused that bug. So it's sort of the JS debugger turned, up to 88 miles an hour. And this is work that's ongoing. Hopefully I'm going to have a little bit more to say about that soon. Other things that are sort of coming, obviously Flexbox has been around for a while, and last year everyone was all about CSS Grid, but we have also adding support in 62 for CSS shapes, and as well as variable fonts. And one of the things that we're really excited about at Mozilla is that we've committed to, when we introduce a new feature into the browser, actually adding an associated tool into our dev tools that's shipping alongside it. We went back and built a Flexbox tool. CSS Grid shipped with a CSS Grid inspector in DevTools. And CSS shapes and variable fonts, when they ship, will have inbuilt tooling in our DevTools day one to let developers introspect and kind of have better control over these brand new features. And we hope that's going to really help with an adoption curve. Web components are coming. If anyone knows me, I've been excited about these since like 2014. So for me, this is a big finally. Web component support will be in Firefox 63, and that's the custom elements and shadow DOM specs. Really just a great way to encapsulate certain pieces of UI functionality and kind of extend the web platform itself with new HTML tags. There's, once again, lots to hear from us there. And a little project we call Gecko View, which is taking the Firefox engine, particularly the one we use on Firefox for Android, and making it a standalone web view. And hopefully we can use this in additional web-enabled products from Mozilla, but other people can actually get the wonder of the Gecko engine in their applications. This is primarily an Android-focused project, but we're hoping it has some wide-ranging applications, sort of the return of some embedding stuff for us. And then, like I said, Quantum Render, we're hoping to ship as soon as we can, because we think everyone deserves a 90 frames per second web, and you will hopefully get it soon. So, one last thing, that's right, Firefox Reality added this at the last moment. We have a standalone VR device resolution of Firefox for that in the near future that will let you jump between 2D web pages you can kind of stick and ball interact with in front of you in a virtual reality headset, and then jump fully into immersive experiences. It's super cool. I hope to have some demos soon. And that's it. I'm Poch. You can find these slides at that URL once I upload them there. Thanks.
Yay, thank you so much. That was awesome. Okay. Next up, maybe we should go with Paul from Beaker. Would you like to go?
Sure, let's do it.
Awesome.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Ooh. All right, we good?
Yep.
All right, let's do this. So hello, everybody. I'm going to be talking about the Beaker browser. Beaker is an experimental web browser. We're trying out some interesting things. And the thing we're working on right now, just to give a review to everybody, if you're not familiar with Beaker, as soon as my computer unfreezes. There we go. No, I don't want to sign in with Google. Thank you. There we go. All right, so Beaker is primarily a peer-to-peer browser. That's what we're working with most. So seeing what we can do when you have browsers talking directly to each other, as opposed to having to do everything through servers. And the primary experiment we're running right now is the DAT protocol. DAT is a drop-in replacement for HTTP that works in a peer-to-peer fashion. So you can actually host a website directly from your computer. When somebody visits that website, they will connect to your browser and fetch the files. And so you can see all of your peers in the UI of a website. And it actually works a little bit like BitTorrent. So you can, once you visit a site, you'll actually help keep the site online by sharing bandwidth. And you can even, if you decide you like the site, you want to help out, you can choose to help keep the site online by seeding it. And so it forms this kind of altruistic network of bandwidth sharing, which is really fun for independent creators who don't have a whole lot of money to throw at hosting. We're a really small team. It's me, Tara, and Matthias, or Macintosh. Macintosh works on that. Tara runs the product development, and I just I do whatever. Here are a couple of our links if you're interested, and I'll throw those up again at the end. So let's talk about what's happened since the last time we did This.Javascript. We have rebranded a little bit. We had this logo the last time. I thought it was a pretty cool logo, but some people pointed out rightly that it is not actually a beaker. That is an Erlenmeyer flask. Thought about maybe just rebranding to the Erlenmeyer Flask browser, but didn't really have the right ring, so we decided to just change the logo. So this is our new logo. And if you're thinking, hey, I don't see the beaker, well, you got to look at it from the top down, and you can see that little lip there, and that's what that is. That's a beaker from the top down. So new logo is out there. Let's see, since last time I talked, we've had lots of people creating sites and applications. We have this service called hashbase.io. It's what you call a pinning service or a public peer. We keep the sites online for folks if they go offline. We've had 2,000 sites uploaded to the service. And I'll show a couple of them here. DatCast is one of these sites, a really cool podcast that Jim Pick and Brett Comnes has been hosting, talking about things going on inside of the DAT community. Enoki is a project by a friend of ours. It's still in the works, so hopefully he doesn't mind me showing this early, but it's a CMS for creating websites that live in DAT. It's a really cool project. I'm excited to see the final version of that. TiddlyWiki is a really cool sort of personal wiki project that's been around for a long time, but recently got ported to work on top of DAT, so you can create TiddlyWikis and share information that way or just use it personally. Here's a file editor that somebody in our community made, so you can actually open up other DAT sites and start working on the files and saving them and things like that. And then there's this project called Fritter that we actually built, and it's like a Twitter clone. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that because that was a pretty interesting developmental milestone for us. But before I do that, let's talk about some of the feature development we've done since the last time we talked. We added in an inline editor into Beaker so that you can go to a site that you have, open up the source code, and start making changes right there. And in fact, you can get pretty far just using the browser to be able to develop scripts or websites, which is really nice. It's kind of similar to how, when you're using GitHub, sometimes you just want to do a little bit of editing right there inside of the UI instead of having to go to your file system and do a clone or whatever. And that's what this is really great for, just really quick work. So really happy to get that inline editor in there. We had somebody contribute a JSON viewer. So now if you go to a JSON file, you get a nice rendered view, just a nice little feature there. We are working on some merging tools to help with development flows so that you can compare two sites, two versions of a site together, get a difference between them and merge them together. It's very nice for getting a good publishing flow going, and that's still a work in progress. This is an interesting API we threw in. We actually decided to create an entire sort of set of experimental APIs that you have to opt into as a way to let us go even further than we might normally go. And this is one of them. This is a way to communicate with any of your peers that is on the site. So you can broadcast messages, or you can message an individual peer. It has similar attributes to HTTP or UDP as opposed to HTTPS. So the channel is not yet secured, which means it's probably good for just doing like really trivial chat and stuff like that on a website. But we thought it'd be a really fun way to just explore the whole concept of peer-to-peer even more. And over time, I think we can layer in some better authentication and security guarantees onto the channel. So that'll be fun. And everything I just showed should be coming out, I want to say within the next month. Also doing a really big documentation push. This is important because we have all these new APIs that we're trying out, and we want to make sure that we are explaining them all well. So this has been a big push that we're actually right in the middle of. So let me talk about Fritter. And this is the last thing I'll hit before I go, just because Fritter is interesting because it's our attempt to push this approach to building websites as far as we can go, right? So we have these peer-to-peer technologies. We have DAT. How far can you get trying to make an application using this technology? And so Fritter is sort of our way of pushing forward and seeing just what we can do. And so it is a Twitter clone. It is purely peer-to-peer. You land on the site like this, and then you create a new DAT site that acts as your profile. And then any post you make is written as a JSON file to that profile. Your actual profile details, so your name and your bio and your avatar are written to that site. And then when you follow somebody, you're following their dat site. And so it works in a purely peer-to-peer fashion, with you syncing each other's dat sites, reading the JSON, and then forming it into a feed. The API is kind of neat because it looks like this. And actually, I think it can get even nicer, but this is what it looks like right now, where here we got an Alice user. Alice, that reference would be to a dat archive. And so you can use this high-level API to interact with the objects that are being published on the site. And we think this has a really interesting possibility for creating a personal website that has these social capabilities built into it. So whenever you visit my profile site, you're not just seeing like my Fritter profile, you're actually visiting my homepage. But I also happen to post these social updates and follow people using that same website, which means I get to sort of customize it and build my profile site however I like, but still interact with the larger network. And so this has been an interesting experiment. We're learning a little bit about how this technology scales. I follow about 50 people, and it works okay. And we're exploring ways to make sure we can scale up to as many users as you like. So that's where we're at. You can download the browser and try it out at beakerbrowser.com. We also have an open collective, which is currently the only way we're being supported. So feel free to join in the open collective. And that wraps it up.
That's amazing. Wow, you guys have come so far since the last This.Javascript. It's amazing. Well, next up, I think maybe I'll pick Brendan to go next to give us an update on Brave.
Or I could go last because we're Chromium based, so everything Paul says, I'm just going to +1. So it's up to you.
I don't mind either way.
Why don't you go, Paul?
All right, okay. Give it a go. All right. Just give me 2 seconds, sorry. All right. I think I'm about to present. We good?
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Hello. Okay. Hello. I'm Paul. I work on the Chrome team, and I run our developer relations group. Yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff we're working on Chrome. Hopefully, going to be pretty quick as well. I think the way I've tried to structure it is, and I'm going to try and be quick today, is into a couple of different kind of like focus areas about where we're thinking about, the future of the next 6 months, maybe a year's worth of work for the wider team and the Chrome team on our side and the DevRel team as well. And there's a couple of areas that kind of overlap and are kind of interesting and kind of a couple of things that we want to focus on. And we're trying to, I think our goal at the moment is to kind of make it easier for developers to build just better websites and experiences at this point. And some of that is like the application of technology through new APIs. And some of that is just kind of hopefully, helping developers just be a little bit more kind of make it easier to build higher quality sites on our side. I think one of the big areas, and this isn't necessarily related to the browser, but it kind of is because it's kind of trying to tie a lot of our story together, but that we've seen a lot of sites that aren't able to kind of get indexed, whether it's in search, whether it's in Bing, whether it's in, even kind of other services like Facebook. And so we're trying to do a lot of work to make it easier for people to build kind of sites that either render on the server or render in the client and have them be able to be discovered and indexed by different search engines at this point. And one of the kind of the things that we've noticed and we've seen is that, there's still a lot of sites that are actually relatively slow to load and they load a lot of JavaScript. And this doesn't help any of the kind of the indexing services out there. So we're making kind of some work on our side just to try and give developers a couple more tools and guidance and things like the Chrome User Experience Report and PageSpeed Insights and Lighthouse. To make it so that you as a developer understand kind of the performance budgets and everything that you have in that place. The other thing that we're looking at as well is like how can we actually help developers build sites that work irrespective of whether the JavaScript is enabled. So we're still kind of trying to work out how we think about and articulate server-side render effectively at this point as well. So I don't have any answers right now, but that's just a bunch of work that we're trying to look at the moment about how we can kind of get more content available and indexed by anything from anything that's basically a machine at that point. It does open up some interesting areas. I haven't got it on this list, but we're looking at things like web packaging as ways that we can actually deliver content effectively as well, and signed exchanges that kind of fall into that. But it's in a weird place of kind of bridging between this idea of having your content be able to be discovered and indexed and actually being able to kind of deliver it at speed. In terms of speed, there are a couple of things that we are looking at at the moment. And again, there's a number of APIs kind of coming through, but I didn't particularly want to list them too much. But we're trying to kind of, at least on our side, rally around this idea that there's very clear goals of what we think developers should be able to aim for in terms of performance. So there's there's two metrics that we're looking at the moment. One is a relatively well-known one, time to interactive, the time it takes for your page to load, have its JavaScript and HTML and CSS parsed and be kind of usable by the user. And one of the things that we're trying to do is just make it clearer that I think our goal is to have pages load within 5 seconds on a 3G network on kind of the median mobile device, which, for want of a better way of saying it, is probably a Moto G, 4th generation device. And the reason why we're doing that is because obviously there's a lot of people kind of coming online for the first time. The average device isn't as fast as people think. And we're seeing as more and more JavaScript kind of comes on the web, we're seeing page load times increase drastically. And we're just thinking that if we can kind of set some goals that we think we should help developers try and achieve through tooling, whether it's Lighthouse and PageSpeed Insights, that's actually probably a pretty good thing to do. There's another metric, which I think is still kind of quite early on, but it's called first input delay. But it's the idea of being able to kind of measure in the wild how long it takes for the average user to be able to actually interact and engage with your site. And there's a video in the link, and I'll share this out later. But the idea is that, time to interactive is something that you can measure in the lab, and you can kind of, locally test and measure. But it's very hard to actually get meaningful information from kind of, the wild at scale via your RUM tools. And things like first input delay we think are a better way of actually measuring how users perceive your site at scale at that point. It's still kind of early in development at the moment, and we need some feedback about whether it's actually the right metric and whether it has, it is actually impactful. But our kind of first indications are that it is, and it's available in tools like the Chrome UX report as well. Other things that we're working on inside Chrome and kind of on the developer relations group, gone dark, is that we want to kind of try and focus a lot of our effort around making it easy for developers to deliver 60 frames a second everywhere. Sorry, this room's getting really dark. There we are. Cool. 60 frames a second everywhere, and I think a lot of that it's the application of best practice, whether it's through things like Flip, which is, a way of actually preceding animations, so that when they do execute, they don't have to cause a huge amount of layout and thrashing. I actually thought it was quite interesting when Poch said, 90 frames a second everywhere. I was going to say 60 frames a second. I like the idea of 90 frames a second, though, but I don't know whether we're going to get there just yet on our side. But Flip is a pretty interesting way of doing it. There's a number of new APIs kind of coming through on the platform. Houdini is one area where there's 3 or 4 different APIs kind of coalescing around this idea of being able to kind of give developers more control over things like layout, how the CSS paint, and how animations work as well. So there's a couple of those APIs kind of coming through, as well as things like which have recently shipped, like Resize Observer and image.decode. And the idea behind some of those is, one, give the developer a little bit more control over, say, things like layout, and then the other is just to kind of see whether we can defer as much work to another thread. So I think in the next 3 to 6 months, you'll probably see a lot more of our team talking about how there's kind of different ways that we can interact with web workers, as a good example, to actually make it so that you never block the main UI thread. And we don't actually know what that looks like at the moment, but we're hoping things like Comlink and a number of other tools kind of come about, which help make it easier to deliver responsive UI. I think the other bit as well, and this is where kind of more the APIs come in, is that the way I'm trying to kind of roughly change the way some of our team work is that we talk more about, we kind of work with developers about delivering not just like landing APIs like that look kind of cool, but trying to work out how developers should use those APIs in a number of different scenarios. So we've got a number of projects on the go at the moment around kind of working with people like WordPress and others to help kind of give guidance about how to deliver a modern progressive web app or progressive web experience. I think we're going to look at other ways that we can kind of work with different groups as well. So like if you're an e-commerce site, like what tools can you use to like make a better website and a better web experience? Because when we do speak to a lot of people, they don't necessarily know why you should build a PWA. And for a lot of people, say in the commerce industry, like they don't necessarily want a desktop PWA, but they think they might want offline support. And I think we're trying to work out how to integrate, now that service worker is pretty much everywhere, like how do you actually integrate these kind of tools and these APIs in a kind of a decent way? And so some of the things that we focused on, I mentioned obviously desktop PWAs. That's definitely a big area that we're kind of looking at investing at the moment. Right now, it's only on Chrome OS, But the plan is to bring them to kind of all the other different platforms. And the idea is that if you've got a progressive web application, which can be installed on a mobile device, it should be able to work across, any platform where Chrome is, or any other kind of platform where, there's another browser that can also kind of run progressive web applications. And so we're just kind of starting off at the moment. And so expect more to come on that side of things. I think in the short to medium term, this isn't like there's not going to be a replacement for things like Electron, because we don't have the APIs on the platform, which a lot of developers need. But I'm kind of hopeful over the next 1 or 2 years that we get to see more advanced APIs come to the platform that really help the desktop P2P story take off. Other things, and like this is where kind of some of the use cases come in, is that we know a lot of developers want to integrate things like the payment request API, but they want to do it with things like PayPal. And so like there's the idea of the any website could be part of the native payment processing systems on the device, where through the payment request handler API. And so that's landed inside Chrome. So in theory, any third-party site could integrate into the main kind of payment request API. And as long as the developer knows which payment provider to target, they'll appear in kind of like this nice native control on that side of things. So we're trying to make obviously payments a lot easier, both from the the initiation of a payment, but also to make sure that we can actually fulfill any payment provider's needs at that point as well. And then in terms of more deeply integrating into the system, things like Shared Target as well are about to land. At least it's in Canary at the moment. But the idea behind this is that your website should be able to be integrated into kind of every point that the user has an interaction with the native mobile device at this point. And so the Share Target API is the complement to the Navigator.share API, where if you initiate a share on the web, a website should be able to receive that kind of share action. And the Share Target API is actually pretty good, because if you're in a native application and you want to share it out, your website, again, will be listed in this space as well. And as you can see in this video, this picture here, like Twitter Lite has got Share Target enabled, which means that you can share directly from Twitter to the Twitter web app at that point from any native application, which I think is pretty powerful on that side of things. There's a bunch of other stuff coming that we're working on. The media, we're doing a lot of media-related APIs at the moment. And so in the past, we've had things like the remote, the kind of the presentation API that's enabled you to kind of cast to a remote device. You can now cast to a connected monitor, so you can target multiple different monitors and kind of cast up. Like if you're in, say, Google Slides, you could, in theory, kind of cast your kind of current screen to another one at that point, and you don't have to do those weird little dances that you do, setting things up. And then we've got things like picture-in-picture coming through as well, so you can kind of take any video element on desktop or mobile and kind of have it as a kind of a modal control that comes through, which is, I think it's pretty nice, and a lot of users want this. And then finally, we've got, it's not working. No, it's dead. It's broke. Right. We got WebXR. I was going to say. So we got things like WebXR as well that's coming through. So that's landing, like the natural extension to VR is to be able to kind of integrate, augmented reality into web-based experiences. And the way that we're looking at this is that you can take any content, such as something like on Wikipedia, an image, and then kind of like cast it into your actual living room. I think it's actually pretty powerful stuff that's coming through, and that's kind of all landing around about now. And in the final area, we want to focus on security and privacy and kind of helping developers build more secure experiences. I think it's quite lightweight at the moment about what we actually know that we want to try and do, but generally improving the adoption of things like content security policy, the cross-origin resource blocking, especially around the Spectre side of things. And then there's things like feature policy coming through, where you can selectively disable features and stop third-party, whether third-party iframes or even your first-party site from even using features that you don't particularly intend them to use. And I think one of the areas that I'd like to look at is like the intelligent tracking prevention that's coming through on Safari. Actually is going to have a potentially material impact on the web. And I want to make sure that developers know how to use those pieces. So I think that's pretty much it. If you're interested in any new features coming through, definitely check out chromestatus.com, where basically it's our feature tracker, and you can kind of see what's in the current build of Chrome, Canary, and beta channel as well. But also, if you need to look back about when a certain feature landed, you'll be able to see that through that. And that's me. I'm done.
Oh, that was very exciting. Thank you so much. I like the chromestatus.com. I didn't realize that was there. And last but not least, we're going to have Brendan present on Brave.
Thanks. Hope this is going to work. I want to talk about some big picture stuff, but I'll also give an update on Brave. And I'll give a little demo. Hope that works too. Forgive my keynote beach balling. One of the things I was glad to hear Paul talk about is how Safari intelligent tracking prevention is changing things for developers. And you know, the larger context there is privacy, which is coming, I think, to all apps through competition and regulation. Our goals with Brave and the basic attention token are to make private by default browsing work, to up the setting on privacy to 11 if the user wants to block things that are toxic or dangerous by default, and therefore, because that breaks a lot of advertising, to reform how the web is funded. In the course of doing so, to pay the user, not to make the user a lot of money, but to help them then direct what they get back to their favorite sites by default, which can be the happy path. So how the web is funded, I'm going to just go through these slides because I think not everyone may be deeply aware of this. Some people are. Forgive me if you know all this. There's an alphabet soup of acronyms and entities that are between the advertiser dollar that funds most of the visible web and a publisher site and the human visitor to that site.
Sorry, Brendan, did you share your slides yet?
What's that?
Are you sharing your slides?
Trying to. Did they not come through?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. Thanks for interrupting me.
No worries.
Yeah. Okay, with that
there we go. Now you're
audio with that audio only presentation, I'll just go back to where I was. Yeah, I said this. Sorry about that.
No
Seems
worries.
I had to press another button.
Thank you.
Great. There is a bewildering array of entities between advertising spend and the publishers who need to get whatever's left at the end of the payment chain, and the people who need to see the publisher's content usually get nothing from that money. This turns out to look like a network dev tool a little bit, which all of you know, and it runs about as slow as this too. This is like a simulation because there were too many requests. I think this was alluded to earlier with JavaScript heavy pages. A lot of it is ads and tracking and analytics and things that you can't see in addition to the ads. And it cannot, in fact, block rendering still, even though people should know better after all those years of being told how not to block the main page. Still happens. And to my larger point here, it also leads to perverse incentives and outcomes in the system. What are called ad exchanges, which are real-time bid auction marketplaces for matching ads to audiences, let's say, use a lot of what are called demand-side platforms, DSPs, and data management platforms, DMPs. And so, I kid you not, this is similar to how some real media sites work. And they load about as slow as you would expect, and they bother a lot of users who then reach for ad blocking, which kind of blows away the whole system. But if you're not an ad blocker user, then you're participating in the system. Even an innocent-looking ad can contain tracking, can contain malware, ransomware, can contain cryptocurrency, and it can leak data. And this is kind of how the system evolved. It wasn't designed this way, but it is a data leakage source. And when you go to use a website, maybe if you've done it recently in Europe, you're seeing lots of annoying cookie dialogues, even more than usual in the last few years. Those are an early response to the general data protection regulation that's come up in the last few years. And it's a law that came into force on May 25th after some delay. And people still don't understand how to comply with it. So there's going to be a bunch of court tests. There's going to be a sort of a messy process of figuring out how to get users' consent for them giving up their data, which is what the basic principle of the law is. And that is not a principle that the web standards uphold. The web standards allow data to leak and be taken by anybody. That this whole server side has evolved opportunistically, and there's lots of data leakage baked into that cake. Well, it turns out, if you read this, and your eyes will glaze over, the new regulation, ad tech is a data breach. And so if you don't consent to being tracked like this, you shouldn't be tracked. And if you are, that's actually illegal. why this matters to an average user is because the mess of tracking really slows down page load, can lead to malware, like I said, all these other problems. So in Brave, we block all this by default. I think people know that. And the benefits are pretty clear. But it's an ongoing game to make this work. Some sites, fight with us. Some sites fight with the law. In the end, I think the system is changing toward privacy by default, but it'll take work like not only Brave is doing, but Safari with intelligent tracking prevention, the ad blockers that are extensions on the major desktop browsers. Turns out there aren't good options on Android. iOS has a content blocker extension model, but it's not widely used. Maybe because Safari is building in some of it as they go. So in Brave, we're not only advancing the state of blocking and trying to get the ecosystem reset to a cleaner, basic state, we also are turning the knob to 11 if the user wants to. Private tabs with Tor released earlier this month. Instead of a new private tab, which you can still choose, you can also choose a new private tab with Tor. Still in beta, we're making sure there are no residual data leaks, but this uses a local Tor proxy to talk to the Onion router network. And it is not recommended you use this instead of Tor browser if you're a dissident in a dangerous part of the world or things like that. However, for people who want to try it, for people who are doing research and don't want their identity to be detectable from their IP address or from anyone surveilling the network, people using Wi-Fi connections, they don't, Wi-Fi base stations, access points they don't really trust, it might be a good idea to use Tor private tabs, and it's certainly more convenient than firing up a whole separate browser. We're also building in an Ethereum wallet with what are called decentralized apps, support for decentralized apps. That's coming very soon. I wanted to say this month, and it might actually make it. We have WebTorrent integrated. We are doing IPFS next. That's coming right after Tor because it uses the same browser-side proxy APIs. And we hope the Beaker browser supported DAT protocol will be supported soon too. We're very excited by Beaker. Basic attention token. This is the unusual part of the project, or the super project that is Brave plus the BAT. And this is the social credit idea that I wanted to do in 2015, where we have a pool of tokens to give to users. So instead of making users pay to support their sites, we give users tokens to get them started supporting their sites. We also lean on anonymity tech heavily. This is something that is coming to the fore in the last few years, but was neglected for 20 years. Zero knowledge proof systems are now coming out. Differential privacy, Apple claims they invented a few years ago. And blind signatures, David Cham's work, which is really cool for having a notary that trusts you certify something as true without knowing what it says. And then you can take out that blinding factor. You can divide it back out sort of algebraically and still have a valid signature. This is super useful for things like ad confirmations, premium product receipts that don't identify you but prove you bought something so you don't have to buy it again, things like that. And I'll give a demo of this instead of going with the slides, but this is what our initial UX looks like. It's trying to put your sort of personal chart beats in your browser privately, allowing you to pin if you want to send a percentage of your budget to a site, or YouTube creator or Twitch account holder, and other such platforms will be supported soon. It's mostly automatic. You can turn off sites you don't want to support, but it just normally would operate over 29 days of private browsing, and on the 30th day, you get a little notification telling you to adjust anything you don't like, and then it reconciles through those zero knowledge proofs anonymously. We don't see your sites. Nobody sees your sites. All the data stays on your device. This is too complex to read at once, but this is how the system currently works. It's partially decentralized because blockchains, including Ethereum, generally don't scale or preserve anonymity. So we do the anonymity protocol on the side. But at the end of the day, we are paying publishers. I'll get some stats there. We're also in the user trial phase of a private ad model. This is ads in the browser if you choose them. Again, it's consent-based. It's not foisted on anyone. It gives users 70% of the gross revenue so that their wallet has even more change in it on top of the grants we give, and that lets them support their sites automatically. That's the default path. If you want to cash it out, you'll have to prove you're not a fraud actor and do some more work. But by default, it flows. It's very difficult in the face of the GDPR, that European regulation, such as cross-device attribution. When you are shopping by researching on your laptop and then you go on the run with your phone and you decide to buy using a mobile browser, that's super important to certain kinds of ads. not to lose track of you, to help you consummate that purchase. And it's practically illegal to do it from the server side in Europe now without getting the user's consent across those devices, which is pretty hard to come by. We can do it privately because we sync your data encrypted. We don't see it. It's encrypted by a key only you have. And we can have local machine learning on your devices see the whole profile. If it's updated enough when the need arises, you can do cross-device attribution. The whole roadmap for this combined Brave and BAP project, we're in phase 2. Phase 1 was the automated contributions that are anonymous. Phase 2 involves the private ads on top. And then phase 3, I want to do an open SDK. We want to head toward web standards. We're still small, but we're growing. All the curves are up and to the right. We have over 18,000 publishers we pay, including Dow Jones Media Group sites. Some sites, have just a self-serve approach. They just come in and verify. I think Washington Post did that without even raising a fuss or talking to us. We also support YouTube stars. Let me quickly, hope you can see this. Tell me if you can't. Show a Brave developer demo. I'm going to try to show how this works. Here's browser settings. Looks like a lot of browsers. You have different panels. There's Brave ads. I don't know if I want to show that. Here's payments. Go there. You see claim my free tokens. Let's try that and hope it works. There's a little CAPTCHA. It's kind of cheesy. It's also hard to do on a high-res screen. Hope I can do it. And yes. Yeah, I got some tokens. All right. So now I'm ready to support sites that I love, like devpost.com. And I can turn on, if I want to support Google, I can do that. I can pin, say I want to support devpost, and push this pin. And I can set, 50% of my monthly budget will go to them, whether I browse there that much, just because I love devpost so much. And yeah, Brave ads are coming. This is the user test dialog. I'll stop here. I think I'm out of time. Thanks.
Yeah. Wow. So many amazing things happening there too. I love getting these awesome updates from everybody. Let me go ahead and try to get you to stop presenting. There we go. Okay. Awesome. Very cool. Okay. So I know Amal has just some burning questions for the second half of this.JavaScript State of Browsers. So Amal, I think I'll just let you take it over and just, audience, feel free to ask questions in the live chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. Some folks are also on there, but Amal, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. I just wanted to first of all thank all of the representatives here from the various browsers. You guys, that was an incredible presentation to sit through. And as an engineer, I know the crippling amount of work that goes into every single update, every single feature. And as a user, I'm humbled, to be living in a time where browsers are competing for speed, security, and just, they're battling it out for the user's heart and affection. So, and privacy in particular. So I think we've got a lot of different browsers here today, just from a even from a stack perspective, right? So we have Beaker, Edge, Chrome, Firefox, and Firefox was a complete rewrite recently. And so I'd like to kind of just, before we get into the specifics of the various updates, I'd like to take a minute to step back and just kind of even the playing field for our listeners here who may or may not be aware that browsers like Beaker and Brave are actually downstream version. They're using downstream Chromium, and so I just wanted to take a minute to say, Paul and Brendan, if you could kind of just share some of the challenges and benefits to kind of being pegged on a specific version of Chromium. And secondly, I'd like to also just ask how old is your version of Chrome or Chromium?
Yeah, it's been interesting. Actually, Brendan, you are in the middle of sort of changing from the approach that we currently use to a slightly different approach, which I'm sure you'd like to talk about. With Beaker, we use Electron to do this work, and that has been the right trade for us. It allows us to work really quickly because we don't have to touch the C++ code base of Chromium. We can use all the tools in JavaScript that is put together by the Electron team. Yeah, it allows us to iterate quickly. That's why we could have such a small team and put together a project like this.
That's why we started with Electron. Unfortunately, Electron turns off the Chromium sandbox that protects your privileged Node.js code from web threats, if you have any, or if some users can be engineered into copy and pasting malicious script and content, which is surprisingly easy. So we ended up forking Electron, and that over time became, I think, difficult. It was mainly I would say, there was a combination of problems, but the main one was keeping up with Chromium stable, which we do. And it's cost us a lot to do that. We're tracking Chromium 67 very closely to Chrome. When Chrome does a security patch release within the 6-week major cycle, we track. We're going to a front-end architecture based on a fork of the Chrome code. So the main URL bar, tabs, toolbars will all be rendered with the widgets that Chrome uses, and not with React and so on using Electron. And some people think, oh, this is a defeat for the web technology stack. And I don't think so. I think, having pioneered this at Mozilla with the Zool framework 20 years ago, starting 20 years ago, it's always a trade-off. And if you're trying to leverage the great Chromium engine work from Google, it makes more sense to just use the whole package. It's hard to get an embeddable engine that isn't married in some ways to its front end. And I think Electron has found this out. I think, though, on the other hand, turning off the sandbox is not a good move. And we keep hearing about Electron apps being pwned, right? Signal comes to mind, the Ethereum Mist browser, to just take or have a user get social engineered into making a mistake, and you get a full compromise. So I think that's a path that people should learn from and not follow others down. But yeah, we're leveraging Chromium, except on iOS, of course, where we use define iOS WebView.
It's all WebKit on iOS, right?
Yeah,
that's the dirty little secret of iOS. That was interesting to hear some of the challenges there. I actually, with Ada Kinlan, who's a developer advocate on Samsung Internet, which is the Samsung downstream Chromium browser, and it definitely is burdensome for their team as well to kind of like stay up to date with the latest version, and they're often several versions behind. So it's interesting to see that you're making that investment. And so I guess on the opposite end of that, we have Mozilla or Firefox that is kind of in this lucky position of having a full rewrite, nice modularized browser that's ready to go and run really fast. So Poch, can you tell us about what it's been like after shipping and being able to iterate more quickly? And
absolutely. Sorry, there's a lawnmower going by outside, so if you hear some distant thrumming, that's what that is. Just first want to clarify, we definitely rewrote big portions of the browser, but I would say that the vast majority of the unknown million lines of code that makes up Firefox is ultimately probably still the same. Work is ongoing to sort of slowly replace the boards of the ship and change its identity, but we're definitely still underway. And I also want to give credit where credit's due, where a lot of the work we did in Quantum actually comes from sort of taking a look at what the work that Microsoft did with Eich, and seeing what they did to sort of take Trident and rebuild it into the Eich, the Eich HTML rendering engine. That was, I think, definitely an inspiration for us to know that that was something that could be possible and reap significant benefit. So I want to definitely say that, we're standing on the shoulders of our other non-Chromium, non-WebKit rendering engine here in this talk, because Patrick and the Eich team are fantastic. So enough flattering of them. But I think, as you said, it's such a fantastic time because we have all this innovation, and I love that we're kind of at this point competing at all the different levels of the stack. I think it's super important that Beaker and Brave can say, okay, rendering engine, yes, absolutely. We want to use the amazing work that's in Chromium, and then really rethink the web on top of it. And I think that's fantastic. And at the same time, we're still challenging some of the underlying assumptions of how the web platform and the web rendering engines can be architected. That's why it's great to have competition, both a variety of Chromium-based browsers and a variety of rendering engines. I think now that we have competition at both levels, we're seeing all this new stuff come out of it, and having Chromium have such a strong embedding story, I think, does matter, because it lets people just with an idea for something on a browser, it's a browser but X, and being able to just start with an off-the-shelf browser and not having to reinvent the universe every single time you want to make a new browser is great. And that's one of the reasons that we're working on Gecko View in particular for Android, is because we recognize the super value in platforms that will have us potentially having a nice primitive to build other browsing experiences on top of. But it's really nice to be on the other side of sort of one of these big rewrite projects. But of course, you're never on the other side. We're still constantly rewriting. We have a project to slowly but surely remove Zool from Firefox. Brendan referred to Zool as the internal user interface language. And we know there's some odd 1,000 lines of that, and we're going to slowly remove it. So yeah, it's relieving to come out the other side of a big rewrite, but you're never actually done the rewrite, because a clean room, start from scratch rewrite of a modern browser is a significant project.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating and great segue into my next question, which is is Patrick. Really, Edge is special browser to me for lots of personal reasons, but I am just enamored at how much progress your team has made in just the short amount of time since the rewrite. I was taking notes for all the updates that you gave, and I think yours were the longest. And so I guess maybe a couple things before you kind of get into some of the just the benefits of the rewrite, right? Because if people aren't aware, Edge is a complete rewrite, and I think the only part that isn't a rewrite is the DevTools, which I think is also going through its own transformation. And so, can you kind of share some highlights about how the rewrites affected your team velocity, and then also the release cycle? It's a little different than other browsers because you're tied to an OS version.
Sure. I'll answer them in reverse because the second question is a little bit easier to cover. We, as of now, we're tied to operating system updates. We're a part of Windows 10. It's something that a lot of people aren't a fan of because they want more frequent updates, myself included. But for now, we update basically whenever the operating system updates, which means major features are usually introduced on these 6-month intervals. For Windows 10, that has been staggered around the springtime and around the fall time every year. There's no guarantee on that. And then there's also iterative updates, stuff like security patches, small feature changes, big security changes. I mean, when Spectre and Meltdown happens, obviously we needed to get rid of things like shared array buffer near instantaneously, and so that went out, within a day or so. But otherwise, yeah, major feature updates are every 6 months. It's something we're wanting to get faster, and hopefully we'll have news about in the near future. As far as how the rewrite's gone, it's been a mixed bag. It was wonderful to get rid of IE. I think a lot of people are really happy to do that. There's a whole bunch of really complex baggage inside of the Internet Explorer code base that was really, really difficult to continue. I mean, IE was the first engine that implemented CSS. Chris Wilson, now at Google, did it back in IE3. IE5 for Mac was the first real version of CSS, though that code base is long gone. There was a lot of firsts done in that code base, and there was a lot of, I don't know, my grandma always said when we were cooking that you threw your first version out. And I kind of feel like it took us a couple of decades to learn that with IE, but we kind of got there. There was a lot of functionality that as a result, we were able to add a whole bunch of new functionality or rethink a lot of the ways that we do things. A great example of that is all the amazing work that the Houdini working group has been doing. They did stuff for like the layout worklet, for example, which if folks aren't aware, a layout worklet is a way that you can describe sort of the algorithm on how to lay out a element inside of a page using JavaScript, it's one of the new Houdini things. And the problem is that all of the Houdini concepts map over to the concepts that are written inside of specifications, the way that like the block model works, or inline sizing, a bunch of different really complex, heady stuff. Unfortunately, if you have a browser that's built on top of either Trident or the old IE engines, or say WebKit, which is built on top of KHTML, most of the engines that powered these layout functionalities were built before any of these terms that exist inside of CSS were created. And so internally, the engines are having to do this crazy mapping in order to get what the spec authors write actually working in our engines. And in order to do it in a way that doesn't make a whole bunch of Chrome engineers quit, they actually spent a number of years re-implementing a lot of their layout engine to be able to basically map over to the modern version. Luckily, the Eich team did that effort earlier, and so we were the first engine that really mapped over a lot of those layout concepts inside of our layout engine, and it feels great. It's really, I don't know, it feels kind of like it has that new car smell in a lot of the code base, at least compared with some of the other browsers, including IE. But there's also, you know, a whole bunch of challenges that come with re-implementing a browser. You know, it's a lot of catch up. A number of the features that we mentioned are like, we now have this, which is already available in other browsers, and that's obviously comes at a cost. You know, we want developers to not dislike us, and we're trying to give people as much as the features they want. That's why we have stuff like the Edge user voice or the Edge bug tracker, where we can keep track of popular features, and we generally ship them based off of, you know, popularity and priorities from that. But yeah, no, it was absolutely a wonderful decision. It's, you know, it just has a cost associated with it, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And can you just correct me if I'm wrong? Edge is now available on not like it's available outside of the Windows operating system.
No, it's still available. It's still directly attached to Windows 10. It's a part of the Windows operating system. We're working on having it be available for like the Windows Store, possibly. There's a number of different options available. We are investigating a whole bunch of different things. Luckily, when you have a bunch of engineers, you can figure out the best way to do something. And generally at Microsoft, we, to our detriment, I think sometimes try and figure out the best possible way to do something. And unfortunately, sometimes that takes time, this included. So.
But you can download it on your Android device, right?
Yeah, so we do have, thank you, sorry if I didn't get the hint earlier. We do have a mobile version of Edge. There are wrappers on Android. It's a wrapper around, it's the native web view on any platform. So it's, you know, Chromium based on Android browsers, Safari based on iOS. And we're not porting over the Edge engine, which is what I generally work on, but it's a lot of the Edge features. So things like your bookmark sync, username, password, that sort of thing can be synced, session syncing, so that you can, inside of Windows 10, you have the ability to still like, oh, look at the browser tabs that I had open on my device earlier in the day. Open it up in your default browser on your desktop. Do a lot of fun stuff like that. But it is a different browser engine that is, like I said, it's the default ones on those platforms.
That's great. And so last but not least, Paul, Chrome team representative here. You know, Chrome is in this enviable position, right? I guess enviable, and what's the opposite word of enviable? Because, you know, everybody wants to like take down the king, right? So everybody here is pegging for your market share, and I think it's the Chrome team is hopefully in a very envious position because of that. And so can you kind of, I'd like to kind of switch gears into talking a little bit about some of the modern web APIs that you guys have all shared. We know that the Chrome team has really kind of, I think, not just evangelized, but also coined the term progressive web app, right? Which is a manifesto for how to create great mobile experiences. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I'd kind of love to hear an update on how that's going, you know, short update if possible. And also, and really some of the APIs that I'm most excited about, I think that are kind of part of the bundle of what makes a great progressive web app are, to me, APIs that feel very inclusive, right? So like the network API, right? Mm-hmm. So being able to detect like whether your user is on Wi-Fi, 3G, and being able to add an event listener so that you know when their status changes. For example, the device memory API, right? That's extremely inclusive because you're able to, know if you can kind of guess what device they're on and accordingly, ship the appropriate bundles or assets over the wire. And so, I think there's this huge push for better inclusivity. And I think developers tend to kind of get excited about things rendering faster. That's great, but really, it's at the end of the day, we're developing for users. And I really personally believe that, I think progressive web apps have greatly enhanced the user experience and accessibility. So I'd love to hear some of the success stories around that.
You want a short or do you want a long one?
I think I already did the long one. So
no, it's all right. It's fine.
I did the long one, you did the short one.
Yeah, it's going okay. That's it. I was gonna say, I think it's actually kind of hard. I was looking at, we did a kind of a dive into the number of progressive web apps that we see out in kind of the ecosystem. And yeah, it's kind of interesting actually. Like I think a lot of the technology's there. All the browsers support the main pieces of functionality. Some might not support full installability or the kind of the install prompt and those type of things, and that's fine. I think that we did Thomas Steiner on our team. He did this kind of bit of research by looking at the top 500,000 sites, I think it was, tracked by HTTP Archive. And then we basically did a big crawl across all of those and looked at the number of sites that were kind of using what we think of P2P features. So whether it's service worker, add to home screen, manifest, and those type of things. And the actual number was about 1%, 1.3% of the top 500,000 sites, which isn't a huge amount, right? And like we've got this other site, which is the P2P directory, which is our kind of way of trying to index as many progressive web apps as that we can find. And that's doing, I think that's a good couple of thousand kind of sites at the moment. And so like in terms of, is it blazing a trail? It's doing good. But I think one of the things that you find is when you speak to a lot of people is that, a lot of people have got a lot of legacy sites. I say legacy sites, just existing sites and content. And it's very hard for people to take a clear, we're going to build a P2P without having to retool. Right. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be careful about is like, how do we help developers kind of incrementally improve their web experience? And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm looking at our kind of like, whether it's our developer relation strategy or our product strategy of just trying to kind of, if we help get the web quicker, like that's a win, right? Like if we get sites loading really instantly, that's a good thing. Like if we get sites working resiliently, so it works offline, that's even better, right? And as you add all these features in together, I think like you ultimately get to what we think of a progressive web app, outside of people getting hung up on the word app as well. That's the other bit. We get to a healthier, more kind of sustainable web where, yes, service worker will be there across all the sites. We want people to use service worker when it makes sense. We don't want people to make sites which are installable when it doesn't make sense, right? Like you don't need sites which are just basic content sites being in, whether it's, like in the future, if we ever get Play Store integration, those type of things, like you wouldn't want my blog in there, right? Like those type of things. But I think we're trying to work out kind of like how all those pieces fit together. I think I'm definitely looking at this like long-term story of like incrementally making it easier for developers to adopt the newer technology at this point, so that in maybe a year's time or 2 years' time, that it becomes like the default thing that everyone does is everyone builds a progressive web app or they have a progressive web app. I don't necessarily think we're completely there at the moment, just because it is a hard story. It's a hard story to tell someone at the moment, go and rebuild your entire like site server infrastructure to work with a service worker. I think that's the bit that we want to try and get across. And I feel like the honest side of the story is that we started off with something like App Shell. And like everyone thought a progressive web app has to have an app shell, and it doesn't. It's just that we didn't tell anyone the different models that you can use or help anyone kind of use different models for architecting a modern site. And I think that's the bit that we have to work on with the rest of the ecosystem as well. It's just like, how do you actually start to think about kind of resilience and performance and installability kind of holistically? And I think that's the mistake I probably made on our team was like, we probably thought we were pretty done when we launched it and announced it. And we didn't kind of necessarily continue for as long as we should have done. So I think generally things are going well. I think that's to wrap up is like things are actually going pretty well, but there's still a lot more to do in that whole part of the ecosystem. I think there's a lot more to do with tooling, a lot more to do with guidance. A lot more to do with kind of showing developers the benefit, so that businesses understand why they should build a performance site, a resilient site, an installable site, and those type of things when it all makes sense. But I think all the pieces are still starting, are coming into place now. And like Safari has been the last major browser, pretty much to get service worker support, is actually good from us now. It's like we're all there and we're in a place where we can kind of push it. So yeah, I think that's my answer.
Oh, that's a great answer. I have a maybe difficult follow-up question for you, which is, so I really appreciate that you acknowledged that, your team might have gotten like really, really excited and very prescriptive about this without kind of thinking through, I think, like the cat herding that is like, building consensus on the web, right? And so that being said, I think, I personally like to use the word manifesto when talking about progressive web apps, because it's very much like, it's a choose your own adventure, what you want to implement first, right? There are a couple of prereqs. We need HTTPS, right? And you do need a service worker, but beyond that, right, it's like, it's your own canvas. And so, I guess a question I have for you on like I think the messaging around PWA is, like, as a developer, I've had a lot of people tell me like Chrome on Android is not interop, right? It's not interoperable. And so I think some of the the pushback that people get from wanting to implement things on their team is that, how many of our users are actually going to be able to benefit from this? And so I think what's kind of generally, like, Chrome has really paved the way with a lot of experimental web APIs. And so I guess it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. I guess, how do you guys manage that? Because, you want people to use it, but then they have to use Android and they have to likely maybe use a specific flavor of Android and latest version of Chrome. And so. Yeah.
I just saw Patrick said that he wants to chime in. You want to chime in first and then I can follow up? Or?
Yeah, Patrick, please chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a fun little anecdote about that kind of goes into this. I mentioned earlier our user voice where people can upvote features. One of the most highest voted thing right now is APNG support, animated PNG image support. It has almost 10,000 votes. And we're the only browser that doesn't support it. And so I dug into the HTTP archive, downloaded about 4.5 million PNG files that are used, and looked for animated PNGs, and we found 110 total, and 50 of them were actual the same APNG. They were just an example of what an APNG is. And basically, we're not going to probably implement APNGs anytime soon if there's 50 of them on the web and we're the only browser that doesn't support it. And so even though Chrome has a lot of cutting edge features that no one else has, we as other browsers, I don't want to speak for other browsers, I can speak for Edge though, that the Edge team definitely looks to see at what features get picked up to figure out whether or not we want to implement those things and the priority at which we implement those things. I can tell you that the fact that people started shipping service workers is a big reason why we started working on service workers, because we knew it would take years to implement. And so as a web developer, while it might feel overwhelming to get that sort of there's all this like fire hose of features coming at you from Chrome. I personally try to advocate to never wait for all browsers to have something before you start using it. Start using stuff like the sharing API that Chrome added on their mobile stuff or whatever, and that's a signal to us that people actually want to use this. Yeah. Just make sure that you do it.
It feels like some APIs are like you have to adopt wholesale to some extent. Like if you can't do differential serving, for instance, and a whole bunch of other things, it's very, very hard for a business to be able to kind of say, or a developer to say, like, I'm going to ship this, and Edge be damned kind of thing. At that point, I don't think they'll do any kind of very good with their kind of managers, I suppose. I think Service Worker was an interesting one where it could work. It was that whole thing that's just like, if it wasn't there, your site would still work, right? And it still kind of work quite well. And I think with things like Service Worker, yeah, I think that's just a hard one, because like the harder bit that we got is like it is normally a fundamental re-architecture sometimes, or rethinking about how you've built your site as well. So that's why I think some of the Service Worker adoption has not been super high at that point. But when we've seen it kind of come through, it's actually been pretty good. But yeah, it's a hard one. Like if you can't detect it and you can't build around it, then I think developers don't want to implement it. And if you look at something like Navigator.share or Share Target, like they're free to implement pretty much at that point, because like if it's not there, it's not going to break my entire site. But if I built an experience that completely relied on share, like, you know, I'd do a native app or something like that kind of thing.
Well, sure, absolutely. I mean, whenever you're dealing with cutting edge features, you can't build it in a way that relies on it unless you're building something for like ChromeExperiments.com or like the IE experiments.
Any Google service recently.
Yeah, yeah, majority of new Google properties. Yeah, I mean, that is when you're not really being a web citizen at that point. You know, you're being a citizen of whatever browser you're building for. And that sucks. That's not the web, right? But I don't know. I've maintained Modernizer now for like 6 years. It is getting to the point where it's becoming less and less relevant because almost all new browser features are detectable trivially. You know, you don't have to run a whole bunch of code to figure out that something works. There's, you know, ways that you can sniff the IDLs or a whole bunch of different functionality to get stuff. And so it's becoming easier and easier to feature detect a lot of these things. And so I personally balk at the idea of it being difficult with like things like Service Worker, for example. I mean, there's you can totally build your website in a way where you push yourself into a corner and you get screwed over if you don't architect your server right. But just using it as a very basic caching layer for your CSS, you know, like something that you know that's hash based for a lot of sites, the long tail of the web, that will be an automatic win for your users if they have more than one repeat visit. Yeah. Dipping your toe in functionality, not going.
I've not seen any of the browser vendors necessarily come out and say like, if there's one thing that you do, it's cache your CSS with Service Worker. That might be actually kind of interesting. Like
it's trivial. I mean, like that's something it's something I try to recommend with anybody if they're ever being like, I heard a Service Worker, but I don't have time to re-architect or whatever. It's like you don't have to re-architect. Cache your favicon. Like literally, just try it. Put it out there. Do the simplest version of it, and it really, because honestly, all you know, Chrome and Edge, I don't know if Firefox has one actually, have public status where we go off and show the number of websites in the open web that are using a feature, and we know for a fact that X percentage of the web is using this new API, and if it doesn't to a certain level, we don't implement, generally speaking.
We're working on a crawling project, but it's definitely not. Yeah, we don't have a search engine to borrow quite yet.
Yeah, it's a big help when Bing does all the heavy lifting on our end. So
I'm gonna try to reel us in here. So Poch, do you have a quick thing you wanted to chime in before we move on?
No, I mean I just wanted to just say that I was excited to hear Paul Kinlan speaking sort of about the next set of challenges for progressive web apps, which is, okay, yes, we have the app shell and we have these new bespoke PWA experiences, but now meeting the audiences of existing large web properties halfway and saying, how do we gradually introduce progressively introduce progressive web app features into web experience? And I think that's actually a message that could get a fair amount of head of steam behind it. And that message has always kind of resonated with me as like, you know, you can start with a really great responsive website, responsive web application, and then just give it these superpowers, right? You're like, oh, now it works offline, and now it, you know, it works offline, and now it can send you push notifications if that's available, and sort of just building on top of the web platform. And of course, you know, if you really want to, you know, it's okay for us to have the opinion that, you know, a good website is offline first. And I think that is important. I actually think a new experience should start there. And we have all these legacy experiences, and I'm, you know, trying to develop these smooth on-ramps. And yeah, that may just start with, hey, can we trick you into installing a service worker? Yeah, to cache your CSS. Because now you've got it, and now your engineers have it, and now they know how to use it. And now they're going to be like, well, what can we do next? What can we? Oh, can we cache these? We cache these responses and stuff like that. And you know, I think there's a bunch of people who got excited about PWA and jumped on, and there's a bunch of people who were reticent either because of browser support or just, you know, discomfort with the completely different shift in paradigm. And so it's great that we're going to now. I would love to, you know, make 2019 the year of, you know, PWAs again, where we have this whole separate set of on-ramps. We talk about it again and try to bring the next 98% of the web into all these brand new technologies. And I think that's true about all new web APIs, where we almost need to come back once all the browsers support them, kind of revisit and be like, hey, remember that? And you know, and I'll do a whole second marketing push. And that's something that, you know, that's something that it's great, because then everyone gets to be collaborative about that part too, right? It's not just, you know, it's not necessarily about early adoption. It's about like we all benefit, and I like that a lot.
Plus one. I like this idea of like retro web, you know, just like bring it back, make it cool again. So speaking of offline is a great segue. So Paul Frazee, am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Frazee.
Frazee, thank you, Paul Frazee. So you are part of a 3-person super team that's kind of really shifting the way we think about the web, really. And for me, like Beaker and that protocol feels very like retro web, right? It feels like how the web was architected, you know, peer-to-peer, and like decentralized, right? And I think one of the reasons why web security is just so hard is because like the web was like architected to be this open system, right? So retrofitting security is like super challenging. And so I'm just really eager to hear, I guess, we don't have time to like get into how incredible and awesome your mission is. Like that's like a whole show on its own. But I'm really curious to see like how, you know, both you and Brendan, I think, are like manage, you know, modern web experiences within your browsers, right? And I guess what have your users kind of come to expect, and how are you benchmarking? And then are there kind of other features that you know, besides, I think, you know, things that are DAT specific or, you know, DAT or BAT specific, are there other things that you're like adding on in terms of web APIs?
Yeah. So first of all, like what people generally come to Beaker for, what we're sort of doing is just trying out crazy ideas is sort of the basis of it. So the users that show up, they're like, hey, what is it like to make an app whenever you have this new API that's sort of an experiment? How does that feel? And actually, a lot of our time is spent doing that too. Like, okay, we added in the API, we have an idea about how to build an app, but what is it actually like to do it? And so it's been a learning, just like this ongoing sort of learning process. Now, other than that, we haven't totally started on it yet, but we're really kicking around the idea of bringing back the idea of web intents. I think that's a really great idea. There's sort of an interesting thing that happens whenever you try to deconstruct service-based software on the web, which is that you're putting a lot more configuration control in users' hands. You sit down at an application like our Twitter clone, and now the data is being stored locally. There's no service that's running the thing for you. So if you want to expand on it with another application, this is where web intents comes into play. Maybe I want to save a photo to an album. I need another application to do that. Now, traditionally, a service might have a photo sharing tool built in, but what we want to try to do is decompose the applications to be as single purpose as possible so that people can switch between them. So an intent would give you the ability to have a URL saying save photo intent, and then you can choose the application which fulfills it. Not a new idea, but one that I think would be fun to explore with this tool set. Boy, what else? Brendan, I don't know if you have any to contribute, but let me think for a second.
Well, there's a whole movement toward decentralized apps, which I alluded to, but it's hard to pick great examples early on. CryptoKitties was this sort of genetically evolved, kind of ugly looking in my view, cat creations that could be unique and valuable. And that was a decentralized app. Centralized exchanges or semi-decentralized exchanges were also a category of decentralized apps. My pal Michael Rogers of Node.js fame has gone to join Protocol Labs, and everyone in that world is sort of swirling around the coming Web3. I'll be talking about that later this weekend at an event in San Francisco. Some of that is a little bit like replace the web, which I think is a tall order. The incremental stuff, like the discussion with service workers brought out, is more likely to get spread around and become kind of like the air you breathe. And then you can do things more decentralized or in a way that works offline or has this sort of modular architecture like Paul mentioned with Web Intents. By the way, we loved Web Intents, and they were key for the Boot to Gecko project at Mozilla, and we were sorry they didn't get advanced further. But there's something about the web that tends to, and always has, right? This is nobody's fault. It just tends to make the server side this opaque blob. Maybe it's Java, maybe it's a Java, an Oracle database. There was a guy named Adam Bosworth I met years ago. He was an executive at BEA. He jumped to Google. I think he's at Amazon. When he was at BEA, he wanted everybody to buy BEA's Java, sort of tier. And then he thought, let's make a browser-side version of that tier so you can just move your app that runs in Java onto your device and have it work offline. And it's like, cool, except that's going to use a ton of memory and be really slow and so on. Brad Newberg, when he was working with Doja before he went to Google a long time ago, took this local lightweight proxy, Polypo, and made a offline mode with it by having it just answer requests locally. And you could build your app that way. You could build it so that it goes to Polypo for the data, and if it needs to go to the server, you can sort of punch through that proxy. That was cool, but again, people have written their apps 1,000 different ways. Ruby on Rails was big then, and you're not going to run Ruby on Rails on your device. So I think if we do have a chance to do something over for the web in a bigger way, it still has to be pretty incremental, but a bigger jump, it should be more like that, or like these various systems that try to use immutable data to make the sort of server and the client symmetric to each other. And I'm excited about that, but it's a work in progress. There's a lot to do.
Yeah, projects like that are actually, in a way, trying to be really minimal in what they change about the browser, because it's just another way for transporting sites. Most of the stack, most of the experience is the same. In fact, DAT URLs behave exactly like HTTP URLs, just with a different scheme. And that, I think, I'm glad we've taken that approach, because it does sort of minimize the amount of new information that people have to take in. Which I think is important. That's why you want it to still be the web, and I think there's a lot of high value to be had because it's just a simple set of file APIs being pinned in, so you can just begin to interact directly with these sites, and that has a lot of power while still remaining relatively straightforward.
URL scheme and it fits the grain of the web, right? And we're looking forward to having that support in Brave for sure.
Yeah. I was really excited to hear the Brave and DAT integration coming up. That I think that's really exciting. I was secretly hoping that would happen a year ago. So I'm really excited to know my wish is coming true. I guess a couple thoughts on what you said, Paul. DAT seems like the how, not the what, right? So it's how you connect to the web, not what the web is. But the web is also really shifting, right? So we have all these mixed realities. For webs, how do experiences like that play into browsers like Brave and Beaker? And these are just curious.
Yeah, you cut out right in the middle there. So,
sorry.
How were you talking about the web VR work?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How do experiences like that play into, I think, just your browser architecture and just.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually spent any time with WebVR, so if anybody else has, I would love to hear what that is like. I have to imagine that it's going to be pretty similar. It's the same kind of thing. If they're using HTTP right now for WebVR, then just drop in DAT instead. The basic difference that DAT brings in is that it just makes the web writable. You can create websites from the browser. You can edit a website from the browser. So any publishing you would normally do using an HTTP server, you can just do it from your own device now. And that's the most significant difference. So with WebVR, I imagine it's going to do the same thing that it does for normal websites, which is it makes publishing and authoring way easier, way more accessible, because you're not having to set up a server anywhere. You're not having to sign up anywhere. You're just opening up the browser and you're pressing a button and saying, please make a new website for me, or make a new WebVR experience, location. I don't know what they're going to end up calling that. So it's almost kind of like it's like merging desktop publishing, like in the old school sense, with the web. You just now can just new website, right in the browser. It's an interesting, almost going back, like you were saying, to the old school sort of web, right? Where it's just it's more making it easier to make websites in a way that you almost kind of think, it would have been nice if you could have done that in the first place.
Just think, we wouldn't need the web archive to sort of kind of save things for us if we had a web that was symmetric and peer-to-peer and immutable.
Right.
It's kind of utopia.
No, that's really interesting. And so I guess for those of you involved with I think some of these modern web APIs from the standards perspective, how do you think like what the future of the web, which I think is going to be very ephemeral, right? I think the web will be all around us. How does that kind of play into like what if you could like crystal ball the web in 5 years, and what do you guys think it would look like? And this is just an open question for everyone.
Crystal ball in the web. Well, obviously it's going to be peer-to-peer. That's got to say that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, actually, I'm completely seriously agreeing with you. One of my most exciting things, not necessarily built on DAT, but one of the most exciting bits of standards early days stuff that's going on right now, in my opinion, is signed exchanges, which is this idea where we have the ability to take a request to a server and the response to a server and replay that to another client effectively. So a search engine like Bing or Google could request a website and then get the response, and then serve the response that they got to another to a user on behalf of the website. What's cool about that is that anybody can be a server. So if I have a conversion of a website on my phone, I can give it to you, and it gets served as though it was from that server because it has a certificate associated with it. I'm really simplifying what the concept is, but the idea is effectively a peer-to-peer web. And I think a lot of major tech companies right now are looking to not to steal Google's bit, but the next billion users, or the next generation of people that are coming online are going to be in a lot of areas that don't have good internet and don't have a lot of it. And so peer-to-peer really makes sense for what a lot of the new looks for the web will be, probably. And it just, honestly, the answer to that question ultimately comes down to what do companies want to fund development for? And I think there'll be a lot of interest in those areas, and as a result, a lot of interest in peer-to-peer.
I think that technology is awesome. I love that that's being done. I'm just going to give you the counterpoint that I would raise to anybody debating whether or not to go all the way with something like that versus using the signed responses, signed exchanges, is that you don't have the ability to, you're not moving the publishing into users' hands if you don't go all the way into a fully peer-to-peer protocol. And I think that's where the most fascinating things come into play. I mean, you get great performance improvements with the signed exchanges. So I think that's a fantastic thing to explore. But the ability to make publishing sites more accessible, but also then creating these APIs for reading and writing data on the peer-to-peer network, then moves users' data into their hands entirely. So you have the signing keys for all your data on your computer. You have all the data stored locally, though you can offload it to a service for caching. And then if you have a purely peer-to-peer application, it gets even more interesting because you can visit the site. You have all the source code there. There's no longer a backend involved whatsoever. Because it's just using APIs provided by the browser itself. So you can go to a site, see all the source code, and then fork the site and begin to mess around with it and change the details. And so you're really, it's almost like you're like the old school small talk sort of like live environment idea, where you're creating a world where everything is open to being hacked on and coded, which I think is where the real excitement comes in, because then it becomes just so much more diverse and fun. And it's like it's just an opportunity for everybody to get in their ideas or customize the software. And I love the idea of social media networks that are actually developed by the user base themselves. Because what's that?
LAN party. I mean, a lot of this stuff came from the local network days. There's something about that scale of human action where you can actually get more of the symmetry we want, where everyone's able to add their own, server, or add their own piece of a shared world. It's really awesome. It's hard to scale. You end up getting into settings, not to rain on anybody's parade, but the reason Netflix and YouTube and other such things work really well is because they actually can get dedicated servers in the last mile point of presence, right? In the co-location facility or the head end facility near your house, maybe even in a box closer. And it would, you know, I can't wave a wand and make that set of hardware and networks be open to everybody, but it's could be done too. It could all be abstracted. It could all be rendered through things like that. So this is a long project, I think, and we should all be ready for it, because I think it could happen, and it will happen if people work on it.
Yeah. I'm just as excited for I think to see like the evolution of peer-to-peer. I think like the constraints around like proxy servers and like, you know, for example, with web Bluetooth, right? There's a proxy server that it gets used, right? So like things like that, I'm a little bit, it's not clear to me how that would really work in a peer-to-peer architecture, but I think that we can figure it out, right? And so I'm confident that we can. Maybe we just use like one person's machine as the proxy. I don't know. Anyways, so I want to kind of move on to like, I think this a really important topic, which is privacy, right? And so with GDPR, you know, Facebook's, you know, ongoing violations of like user trust and you know, it's kind of, I think the masses were kind of becoming more woke, so to say, to like all the violations of like data breaching that are like just our daily, just the norm, right? And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, if it's everybody's problem, it's nobody's problem, but this is really everybody's problem, and it should be everybody's problem. And so I have to say, Brendan, like Brave is kind of, it's really, it's an appropriate name for a browser, because it's Brave, you know, you're tackling a very a strong lobby, right? Which is the ad tech world. And so I heard you say once that like ad tech is a data breach, like, right? And the data breaching is kind of baked into like our modern web experiences. And so I guess, can you kind of shed some light on, I guess, how you guys are, like, I guess, what's on the roadmap for kind of making this idea of like, you know, like users kind of tapping into the revenue, like making that idea a bit more mainstream, because I think you guys hit 3 million users this month, which is exciting, but I think we need like 300 million users, right?
Yes. So it's you know, you go from 0 to 10 to so on. You have to go through 3 million to get to 300 million, and it seems to me that a lot of other browsers and apps want to come along. We've heard from several other browsers interested in being the second BAT app. But you know, whatever happens here, I think there's an even bigger play in the standards bodies. ITP is already in Safari, and it's shaken up the world. There are things independent from intelligent tracking prevention that Safari does, that Brave does. Like, I don't know if people know what HSTS is. It was a standard added entirely with good intentions to help you when you go to your bank, always go through HTTPS, even if you just type in HTTP:. And so it has to, it's a protocol, so it has to at least learn once that this site really wants to always use TLS. Therefore, that's a bit of information that's saved in your browser, so that when it's set to 1, you always go through TLS. That bit can be strung together with 31 other bits for 31 other sites, fake sites, spammer type sites, and you get a 32-bit identifier. You can set the bits to 0 or 1 depending, and spell out a user ID. And it turns out one of these ad tech players, a big one in France called Criteo, was doing this. It was using what's called an HSTS super cookie, because by embedding references to these 32 sites, you could spell a 32-bit number. Safari blocks this, Brave blocks this. Criteo must have moved on to a different technique. My point in telling this story is that first of all, there are just lots of ways with web standards to trap users, but there are only relative few that are economically practical, because the other ones are too iffy, or they don't work in all browsers. There's just a few that have bubbled to the top, and so you can fight them by blocking them. But wouldn't it be better if the web standards actually had semantic markup for things like ads and trackers? If it did, any track somebody, and we'd still, as an ad blocking tracking protection browser, like a lot of other such add-ons and browsers, we'd still arms race with them. But the web as a whole would have a higher level of discourse. Like, you could talk about tracking, you could talk about ads per se, you could have better semantic markup for them, so they not only can be blocked, but perhaps they could be rendered better, they could be lifted out of their context in the public page.
Whoops, you're covering up your mic. You covered your mic in the end.
I probably just moved my head too much. I'm arguing that we should finish standardizing the parts of the web that evolved after like 1997, when HTML4 was standardized. The whole value chain on the web was not standardized. It evolved on the server side and in bespoke protocols among these ad exchanges and trackers, third parties, payment processors like PayPal. These are all great things for consumers in their time. The request API, that's just a little bit of plumbing that should have been there and can finally be there. But to me, things like the basic attention token, which doesn't require any intermediary, can use that API or can use a built-in browser ledger like we provide that provides anonymity. So the future should end up in standardization. These should not be points of competitive differentiation forever. The competition can be at other layers and other qualities. And if we do this right, I think that will also tie into the peer-to-peer idea we were discussing a few minutes ago. You really can't have the one or two winners like Facebook, who gets picked on because they don't have a browser here. They can't rule the world forever. It's just not going to happen. We all thought Microsoft would in the 90s, right? And who knew? Things change. So the standards need to address and express the true value that people exchange, and not leave these to be dominated by commercial winners from one era or another. That's my hope.
Yeah, well, great segue into my next question, which is going to be on interoperability between browsers and participation in web standards. So I guess I want to start with you, Brendan. You're hot off the mic there, calling Microsoft, not the world like a domination like machine that it was. Microsoft is super back, by the way. They're like the comeback kid, like 2.0 times like whatever, like Microsoft is awesome. So I guess what are you doing in the web standards body to kind of push forward some of these things, right? So I'm sure you're involved with the W3C at some capacity. I know you're on TC39, right? But is Brave kind of part of W3C? Are you guys advocating for these things? Is there a working group that we should all be joining if we're interested in these topics?
Yes. So there's the Web Security Working Group, I believe, and we are a member. Brave is a member. And at the TPAC meeting, we talked to Apple's rep. I think we talked a little bit to Tom Deep from Mozilla. And there's more to do. So I think this year is really the year to lean in. Last year was, for us, a lot of building. And this year there's a meeting of TPAC in France, in Lyon, I think. And I'll make sure somebody from Brave will be there. And we'll try to pick up this opportunity and run with it. Because, like I said, it's not just Brave. It's not just ad blockers or extensions who may not even be members. It's Apple, which is a big deal. Mozilla has tracking protection as an option that they're surfacing more in their UX. So I think between Mozilla, Apple, and Brave, at least, we can do some damage, positive damage.
Yeah. For what it's worth, my default browser on mobile is Firefox Focus. So it's incredible, and I think Mozilla might not be as loud about it, but they're very invested in that. User privacy and just better experiences by like killing ads. All right. So I guess in terms of interoperability, so I know Edge and Chrome, y'all are kind of either running. Well, Chrome is very involved with the WPT project, which is a project that tests web standard, like web specifications tests against different browsers. Right. So if I have a test for a service worker and I'm a Mozilla engineer, I push it up to this repository, and then browsers from all over can run my test and make sure that it's also green for them, so that we can all make sure that we implemented the same version of a web standard. And when tests are green among different browsers for the same standards, it makes our lives as developers easier, right? It's less like Firefox version X bugs, and it also, for users, it also means like there's less, less Chrome only sites, right? There's just they get uniform experiences regardless of where they're coming from. And so I guess of the panel that's here, I guess, can we maybe just do a round robin? I mean, how many of you are like running WP tests and ideally like also contributing to it?
I'm literally writing a suite in between questions right now on app manifest stuff. Yeah, no, web platform tests, for any of our viewers that don't know, is really kind of revolutionized the way that a lot of browsers work together. We had a browser summit like 2 years ago now where everybody showed up and like multiple Apple people showed up, and that generally doesn't happen. So, I mean, it's something that everyone is really invested in. Huge investment from Mozilla historically, as well as currently. Chrome has put in a ton of effort as well. Microsoft has been porting over our 20-something-year-old test suite to make sure all of our old enterprise bugs, don't break over into this system, which has been a long effort, as you can imagine. But I mean, the fact that what's wonderful, it's sort of the thing that Potch made reference to earlier, where we like if one browser does something, kind of it raises all the ships simultaneously. So like when Chrome obviously led the way with service workers, and they put a ton of really wonderful service worker tests and web platform tests, and as a result, every other browser could implement faster because we knew that these are the guidelines that people are building service workers against. So, when Safari wanted to ship service worker, when Edge wanted to ship service worker, once we passed that test suite, we felt comfortable. It's just normal test-driven development.
Yeah, and special shout out to my colleague Mike Panisi, who helped port over hundreds of service worker tests that the WebKit team was also able to leverage and to speed up their development. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, Mike, I know. I was like, wow, Mike, you realize your legacy is pretty incredible already.
Shout out to you and to Bocoup in general. Y'all do a wonderful job. I think you get paid by almost everybody in this room to work on browser tests. There was web platform tests, Test 262, which is a phenomenal JavaScript test suite that really helped tons. I mean, Chakra relies on it every day, so it's Bocoup's wonderful, and thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll have to give a shout out to my Rick Waldron and Leo Balter from my team that are two maintainers on that project, but we all contribute to that, and it's an exciting.
Microsoft too.
Yeah, Microsoft too, absolutely. So we're almost out of time here. There's a couple things I did want to just touch on, which is dev tools. So first of all, Chrome, thank you, because I am, for better or worse, Chrome has kind of ruined me for all other browsers. I get into other browsers and I'm like, what this? Where the button? So Chrome has rapidly, has had the good fortune of having maybe a dedicated team, right? Chrome and Firefox are one of the, I think, better dev tool experiences. But I'm happy to say that there's now a protocol for DevTools, and you can kind of think about it as an API, in how you would interact with the browser. And I'm happy to say that Edge has got some awesome things planned. So would you mind sharing some of that, Patrick? And also, Pod, if you could chime in, what's your tool experience like?
First, I'd just like to shout out to, obviously, Chrome's done a phenomenal job with dev tooling. There's a reason why everyone loves developing in Chrome. Pavel and everyone else on the DevTools team is phenomenal. And also, I wanted to give a shout out to the Firefox team. They've done an absolutely insanely good job the past couple of years. They've really revolutionized what's possible in dev tooling as well, and it's been a huge source of inspiration for our DevTools team. Other than sorry for the current state of our dev tools, we're working hard to make it a lot better. I don't have much to say. I feel like I've taken up a lot of time. I'd love to step aside so Paul or Potch could make a comment, but just, thank you for showing what the web can be.
Yeah, I concur that, Chrome's dev tools are definitely a North Star that everyone aims for in terms of functionality and functionality and UX and sort of having the tools you need right at your fingertips. Obviously, if parity with those is always huge. And then additionally, we're trying to both catch up with those and then also go back and fill in some stuff. I talked a little bit about sort of what we call the design tools, which is just it's just a bunch of extra tools built into the inspector specifically around new specs to try to make sure that when new specs come out, we've got tools for them. And our hope is that that's true in general going forward for web APIs and CSS features and stuff like that. We'd love to ship with tooling. And sometimes that's obvious. Sometimes it's just, a new JS feature, so it's in the debugger. But when it's new paradigm stuff, it doesn't make sense to ship service workers without service worker tooling. Apologies for how slow we've been to get that up and running. Turns out switching to a multi-process architecture while shipping service workers while trying to develop a service worker tool is a disaster. But that should be a little better soon. And like you say, the protocol work and being able to communicate to remote dev tools is huge. And we are working on both a sort of a Firefox debugging protocol, which is once again based on a Chrome debugging protocol, but will allow us to hit remote debugging targets on Firefox for Android and things like that. So it's great, and we're definitely standing on the shoulders of giants. But we're also, we also have a one of those extendy dino claw grabby sticks in our hands and trying to reach even higher.
Well, if I remember correctly, I heard you say something earlier where you said your team is committed to not shipping a feature without DevTools support. And I thought that was awesome, and also a very, I think, high standard that you guys have set for yourselves.
Maybe committed is not we strongly intend to ship features with DevTools support.
Yeah,
life's complicated.
If only all the code that I hoped to have written just appeared one day, that would be awesome. So I guess really quickly with WASM, you guys are kind of really leading that space, and Rust is next up on my languages that I want to learn. So can you kind of just tell us? You mentioned something around building some cool tooling around or libraries for using JavaScript and Rust interoperably to do some performance enhancements. Can you kind of just shed some light on just what's happening in the WASM world at Firefox?
Yeah, I'll be quick about this because I know we're super short on time. The goal is to be able to use WebAssembly modules from within, amongst ES modules. There's a lot of standardization work to be done there around making WASM modules behave like ES modules, and that's a lot figured out. My colleague William Clark and folks on the WebAssembly and Rust teams are working really hard on that. They're doing fantastic work in the standards bodies, getting that move forward. So hopefully we can all agree, and then it's everywhere. Yeah, just like I said earlier. But yeah, we think of WebAssembly not necessarily as plugins reborn or Pinnacle or anything like that, but more trying to be more hand in hand with the rest of the web platform and trying to build out bindings to let you actually from within binary modules interact with the DOM and stuff like that. That stuff's all early days, but it's very important to us that it's not a walled off binary format for the web, but is really part of the web platform that lets people participate in the web platform via a highly optimized compiled toolchain.
Yeah, that's a great point. It wouldn't have happened if it had not evolved from a subset of JavaScript. Obviously Java and then Flash tried these sort of brick, whole program monolithic approaches, and they just were these opaque blobs. You couldn't talk to them quickly or efficiently. They couldn't talk to the DOM APIs except by injecting JavaScript, things like that. So evolution, I've been betting on it for a long time. I think it's going to keep betting on it, even for Web3 and peer-to-peer.
That's awesome. And so we're pretty much almost out of time. I think if my last question to everyone here is, what's your mid-2018 web wish, right? And so what do you wish the web could be? And I'm going to leave that very open-ended.
I just like that fact that everyone said web intents earlier on. So
yeah.
Hyper-connected experiences where you can discover it and engage with it. I've got a demo of it working again on the web with just message ports and message channel. It's really good.
That's awesome. +1 on that for me. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, hypermedia, the vision of hypermedia gets a little lost in the world of mobile apps, but we're bringing it back piece by piece. Just got to keep going.
Ship less code, do less JavaScript. You're probably doing way too much. Tool it, figure it out. Even if you get really annoyed by Alex Russell, listen to him because he's probably not wrong about everything.
CSS.
You know what's funny is I was just about to like yell out something super trolly. I was gonna just say web components, like let's stop reinventing like drop down. It's like, sorry guys. Anyways, all right. Paul.
Truly live environment. Every website or web application open source and editable so that anybody can get in there and start making a web application what you want it to be.
My 2018 web wish is for a weirder web with a lot more little weird websites and services, and sort of, you know, re-atomizing the web from these giant monoliths. I'd love to see lots more GeoCities grade content, because that will tell us that there are a lot more people out there who want to make stuff.
What about Amal? What's your last wish? Or did you go?
No, yeah. Paul said web intense, but I think you Paul. If I know Paul wants more. So Paul, you want to go ahead?
No, I was sorry. I was agreeing with someone. I had my microphone on by mistake. I was going to say glitch. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff like creators creating things at the moment. It's really good. It's really nice to see more content coming through. So, but sorry, I just interrupted. So
yeah, how about you, Tracy?
A more collaborative web, which I think we all are doing. I mean, I love this.JavaScript and these kinds of events, because I feel like the more people can collaborate, the more people can hear what different people are doing, the better it is for the web in general. And sometimes it's just getting the right people and in the right room. So what about you, Amal?
Mine is for like web developers, like start thinking more about users, like not just about your developer experiences. Like it's not like I am the biggest tooling nerd. I like make it go faster, make it go better, but like also like let's spend more time on newer, like exploring newer areas of the web to make it better for all users. Like less time like re-engineering our like tooling and configuration files. So.
Well, awesome. So you can follow all these amazing folks on Twitter and continue the conversation there. Their Twitter handles are on the website, this.co/JavaScript, as well as in the YouTube channel. Isn't that terrible? This.co. What was I thinking? Anyways, thank you again so much for joining. And we will have contributor days coming up, browser contributor days, much longer conversation, very much like the conversation you just saw, with a few specific goals in mind, and state of mobile coming up soon as well. So stay tuned. Otherwise, see you all on the internet.
Thanks for having us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.